Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Nourish and Strengthen podcast. I am Trainer Lindsay, your host, and today we are going to be talking about self-sabotage. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, self-sabotage is kind of like this, this gray thing that nobody really knows what it is, what it means for us, why we do it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to get right down to the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to go over 7 situations where self-sabotage is more likely. Okay. And then we're going to talk about why we do it and also 3 ways to stop the self-sabotage. So if you have fitness goals and you just find yourself, kind of getting in your own way and really preventing yourself from reaching those goals. And we'll go into more about that, what that looks like in just a minute, but you got to listen to this episode. Okay. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first, let me tell you a little bit of a story. So this story happened to me, oh gosh, probably 12 years ago, I think now. And it was a time when I was in a fat loss phase. I had some fat loss goals. And I remember that I went to this neighborhood barbecue. It was behind our house. And I went to this neighborhood barbecue and I was doing so quote, good. I brought my own food, which I have all different feelings about that now, which I'll go into in future episodes. But I brought my own food. I was making really good choices at this barbecue. And I remember I had little kids. I can't remember, gosh, maybe Aubrey she was probably I don't know, 2 or something. She was little, which yeah, I guess that would be right, about 12 years ago. I remember I had to come home. I had to go home and grab something. So I ran home, and for whatever reason, I don't even really know why. And I didn't know why at the time either, but I was like, I'm just going to have a little snack. Nobody's home. Nobody can see me munching on this food. So I remember getting out the chocolate chips and the peanut butter. That was always my go-to when I was going to go off plan. It was the chocolate chips and the peanut butter. I know that lots of people feel me on that one. And then it was the chips, and then it was the cereal, and then it was a few bites of ice cream. And pretty soon I found myself, 15 minutes later, not very long, and I was headed back to that barbecue, and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've completely sabotaged my evening of staying on track. I went to all this effort to make my own food and bring that to this barbecue, only to go home and in private, munch on all this junk that did nothing for me or for my goals. That is textbook self-sabotage right there. So, whenever we act in a way that is not in line with our goals, and we are doing this and we're kind of standing in our own way, that is self-sabotage. And most of the time we don't know why we're doing this, right? Most of the time, we don't know why we did a thing. We don't even realize it as it's happening. But then a little bit later, a couple hours later, or the next day, you're like, oh my gosh, I just totally prevented myself from doing what I wanted to do yesterday or earlier, So this is tough, you guys. It's a super tough thing. Everyone struggles with it. So if you find yourself kind of always falling back into these habits, don't beat yourself up about it. Okay. The more we understand about self-sabotage and why we do it, it's going to be easier to stop. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump on in. I've got 7 situations here where you're going to be more likely to self-sabotage. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk through each of these. So the first one is when you have no end date on your journey. Okay. Let's just say, let's use the example throughout this episode of losing 30 pounds. Okay. Let's say you wanted to lose 30 pounds, but you have no end date and you're just kind of well, however long it takes me is totally fine. And there's kind of no hustle. There's no specificity to your programming. An example would be, let's make an analogy here. If you were running a race and you had no idea when it ended, if someone just said, okay, ready, we're all going to run this race, get to the starting line and go. And you didn't know if it was 1 mile, if it was 5 miles, if it was a whole marathon, 26.2 miles, you're much more likely to, quote, fall off track, give up, instead of continuing to just run and run forever, right? So if you don't know how close you are to the end of your journey and you have no date or end goal, no way to know when you've reached that, it's going to be so much harder to stick with the process. And it's going to be much more likely that you'll self-sabotage. Okay. Situation number 2 is when you don't have a clear strategy for success. Okay. First of all, you need to know what success means. That's kind of going back to situation number 1. You need to know when you've arrived and what that looks like for you, right? But then you really need a game plan for your nutrition, your workouts, your mindset, and your recovery and your stress management. All of these things need to have a clear strategy that is designed to help you reach your goals. Okay. This is exactly what we do in my coaching program with my Moxie Metabolic Reboot System. If you want info on that, just shoot me a DM on Facebook or Instagram. But you need to have a clear strategy, because if you don't, you're likely going to be spinning your wheels, not seeing results. And when you're not seeing those results, you're more likely to self-sabotage, because that's when you think, well, I'm not seeing results anyway, so I might as well have the cookies, right? So also just saying like, I hope I can do this, I hope I can see results, I hope I can lose the 30 pounds is not enough. You guys, when I hear someone say that, when I hear someone say, I hope I can do this, to me, that's kind of a victim mentality, right? Like, for example, if you're, have an event going on, or you're going on vacation, or whatever it is, and you're like, I hope I do okay. Or if it's like, I really don't want to have dessert tonight, I hope I can avoid the dessert. It's almost like, I hope no one comes up and shoves cake into my mouth. I hope that doesn't happen. Like, no, you have to have a clear strategy for success. So let's go ahead and take this example, the no dessert. Okay. So let's say you have this goal of losing 30 pounds, right? And let's say to reach that goal, you want to avoid dessert at this function. Again, this is not me saying you can't ever have dessert reaching your goals. That's not what I believe at all. This is just a little bit of an example. Okay. So let's say that, you want to avoid this dessert. You need to have a clear strategy. So success means you didn't have dessert tonight, right? You know what your success looks like. That's an end date for this little example, or an end goal. And so you need to know what that looks like. Okay. If I'm going to avoid dessert, that means I'm going to have maybe a low calorie drink I'm sipping all night. Maybe that means I'm going to stay away from the dessert table. Whatever it is, you have to have a strategy for success, as opposed to just, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I hope I don't eat dessert. Does that make sense? Okay. Number 3, the third situation when self-sabotage is more likely is when your plan for success is too restrictive. Okay. So guys, restriction is all about our mindset. All right. Let me do a little soapbox here. We get to decide how we feel about things. Okay. Let's take tracking macros, for example. There are plenty of people out there who say that tracking macros has transformed their relationship with food, because it has taught them that they can have whatever they want in moderation, right? There's also a lot of people out there who claim that tracking macros has, given them an eating disorder or completely destroyed, their relationship with food. What's the difference here? Okay. The circumstances are exactly the same, right? The circumstances are a person started tracking their macros. Okay. Now, I'm not going to say the only difference is their mindset, their past history with, relationship with food, relationship with their body, all that kind of stuff, of course, plays into it. But a big part of it is your mindset. You get to decide what restriction looks like. Does that make sense? You get to decide if you look at tracking macros as in like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome because it means I can eat whatever I want in moderation and include, certain things that will help me reach my goals, but also include the fun foods that I love, right? You can choose to look at it like that, or you can choose to look at it like, because I track my macros, because my macros are 150 grams of protein and 55 fat or whatever, I can't have a whole pizza, right? Do you see what I mean? So it's all about how you look at it. And so if you are looking at your plan for success with too much of a restrictive mindset, and it's kind of that victim mentality we talked about just a minute ago as well. If you are looking at it with that restrictive mindset, it's going to be so much more likely that you're going to throw in the towel, self-sabotage, eat all the cookies, because then you think, well, I'm not gonna reach my goals anyway because this is too hard. This is too strict. I could never live like this forever. You guys, there's plenty of people who, think that they could track macros forever. And that's a whole another topic on another day. But when you view your plan for success with too much, that it has too much restriction, it's going to be much harder for you to stick to it. Okay. You really need to have an abundance mindset around food. Okay. And it can be a conscious choice. You can consciously decide, I am going to look at this and think, I can eat whatever I want, and I get to choose the foods that help me reach my goals. So when I was competing, people used to ask me, oh, can you eat this? And I would respond and I would say, yeah, I can eat it. I can eat whatever I want. I am just choosing to eat the foods that are going to get me closer to my goals. Okay. So that one was I took a couple tangents on that one, but you're more likely to self-sabotage when you feel like your plan for success is too restrictive. Okay. And just one little soapbox on there is, our mindset around restriction can really dictate that one. Okay. So another situation when self-sabotage is going to be more likely is that your definition of success is only perfection. You guys, if you tell yourself that you have to be perfect in order to reach an outcome, failure is the only option. Okay, think about that again. If success only means perfection, failure is the only option, because perfection is impossible. It's literally impossible to be perfect on every single thing, every single day, all of the time. I mean, for example, think about, if your goal was to lose 50 pounds, but you lost 46 pounds, does that mean you failed? No, of course not. When you think about like, this is my end goal and I have to reach this, otherwise I failed, you're going to self-sabotage because perfection feels impossible. It is impossible. So you might as well eat all the cookies in the house, right? That makes sense. Another situation when self-sabotage is more likely is when you're feeling imposter syndrome. Okay. So when you're starting out in your journey, you don't really feel like the person that you're trying to become. Okay. So you have to be more aware in that situation of what that feels like. So I see this showing up a lot more with our clients who have a lot more weight to lose. Okay. And we're going to touch more on this specific situation in a few minutes. But, when you have, I don't know, let's just say 100 pounds to lose, you might feel like, well, I am not that person yet. And so I can't act like that person. Or let's use another example. If you are trying to adopt some new healthy habits, if you're trying to be one that goes to the gym, okay? In the beginning, it can feel hard to get up and go to the gym because you don't quite feel like, quote, someone who goes to the gym quite yet. That's not your identity yet, okay? So you just have to be more aware in that situation that self-sabotage is going to be more likely because you're not quite the person you're trying to become quite yet. So it's going to be tougher, okay? Another situation where self-sabotage is more likely is when you push blame to external circumstances. Okay, this is that victim mindset, you guys, when you say, well, of course I couldn't stay on track. My kids were baking cookies. Obviously, I had to eat 6 of the cookies. Of course I couldn't have just one cookie and then be done with it, right? So I hear this all the time, and you have to take ownership of your choices. Or another one that's really common is, well, I don't have time to do XYZ. I don't have time to get 8 to 10,000 steps in because of this, that, and the other, right? There are always going to be solutions. Okay, now I'm not trying to sound insensitive. I'm not trying to sound like, no excuses. You have to do the thing no matter what. Just be aware that it's always possible. Okay, I'm not saying you always have to do the thing no matter what your situation is. Just know that you can if you choose to. And oftentimes realizing that is super empowering. Some people kind of feel a little bit attacked when they think about that, like, oh, I actually do have the power to do whatever I decide to. But really try to look at it. Again, this is back to that mindset. Try to look at it more from the way of an empowerment thing. Like, I can do whatever I want to, whatever I put my mind to, if I decide it's worth it for me. And if I decide I want to. Does that make sense? So do you guys relate to any of these? I would love to hear, okay, yeah, I really related to that third one or that fifth one or whatever it is. So those are situations where self-sabotage is more likely, right? So why do we do this? Why do we do this when we have goals that we know are important to us, yet we stand in our own way? Why do you guys think we do this? And so we think, it doesn't help me. How did going back to my house in the middle of that barbecue and munching on all the treats in my house, how did that help me? Well, okay, guess what? It actually does help you. And you might be thinking like, what? How on earth does that help me? Especially when you're so close to a goal, when you're doing so good on your progress on, sticking to things. How does it help you? Okay, think about this. So this is getting a little deep here, but it actually helps your subconscious mind because oftentimes deep down, we're kind of scared of success. Do you guys relate to that at all? It's easy for us to stay stuck and it's easy for our brains to stay where they're at. Growth is hard. It's growing, it's pushing past those comfort zones, it's doing things we've never done before. That's what's hard. It's easy for us to stay stuck and to continue doing the same thing over and over again. It's what our subconscious mind knows and understands, right? So in that sort of way, it does help us. And it's kind of our subconscious mind like saying like, see, you can't do it. See, this is why we're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. Another way that it helps us is kind of more from our hearts a little bit. If you put your whole heart and soul into something to try to reach your goals and you don't succeed, like what does that mean? Oftentimes we take that to mean something about us, right? We internalize that and we take it to mean that we are a failure, right? We take it to mean that we are worthless, that we are nothing, that we failed. And if we failed at that, I mean, heck, we probably fail at everything we try, right? We get a bit dramatic about these things in our heads, right? And so sometimes it can be easier for our brains to comprehend not trying than failure. Does that make sense? So oftentimes we can be, afraid to fail. So it's easier if we don't even try. So, and if we can be afraid of failure, we can kind of also be afraid of success. And so that shows up in a totally different way. And you might be thinking like, what, Lindsay, how could I be afraid of success? This is what I want more than anything. And this is another one that I see showing up with those clients and those ladies I talk to that have these bigger weight loss goals. Like, let's just go ahead and use that 100-pound example, because they might be thinking, and this isn't oftentimes a conscious thought process. You don't even realize you're thinking it sometimes. But you might be thinking, I want to lose 100 pounds, but deep down you're like, well, I don't know how to be a thinner person. If you're 250 pounds and you want to be 150 pounds, that's kind of a different identity. And that can be a bit scary. It's like, I don't know how to live that way. I don't know how to show up in my life that way. Am I going to lose relationships? How am I going to have to evolve to make that big transformation? And it can be scary. So on one hand, we can be afraid of failure. And on the other hand, we can also be afraid of actually succeeding, because what does that mean for us? What does that mean for people around me? What if I have a spouse who doesn't like to exercise? And what if I turn into a gym rat or someone who loves to exercise? Like, what does that mean for us? Does that make sense? So the next step here to really figuring out why you self-sabotage, and it's going to be different for everyone, is understanding this and really trying to think, what am I afraid of? Okay. Am I afraid of failing or am I afraid of succeeding? And I would really recommend, really meditating on this and thinking through it and journaling about it and think like, what am I afraid of? And that's going to be key to understanding how we stop doing this. Okay. It's this awareness, just being aware of what's going on and why is going to help so much in stopping or at least diminishing. I'm not sure we ever stop the self-sabotage. I almost feel like it's something that's, ingrained in our human minds. We have this subconscious brain, we have this conscious brain. And I think it's something that a lot of us will always struggle with, but just being aware can really help. Okay. So for example, maybe you're afraid of failing in public. Okay. Maybe you're afraid of what other people are going to think of you. Maybe you're afraid of offending other people. Or like I said before, maybe you're afraid of changing and succeeding and what that will mean in your life, right? So another thing to think through that you can journal on, you guys, is, what is that fear? So once you've thought through what you're afraid of, what is that fear causing you to do? Okay, so here's an example. This is not something from my life, it's just totally an example I'm just thinking up. But maybe you're afraid to tell your in-laws about your fat loss goals because you don't want your mother-in-law to feel like she can't make certain foods when you go over to her house. Okay, so maybe you have family dinners periodically and you don't want to tell her that you're trying to lose weight because you don't want her to think, oh, I can't make these certain meals because my daughter-in-law is trying to lose weight. And so because of that, you find yourself not sticking to your plan through the weekends. And because of that, you're not really seeing results because okay, well, on Sundays, I have this meal with my family and that's not going to be on track. And so I might as well, like, what my weekend's going to be, screwed anyway. So I'm going to just start over on Monday. So I might as well throw in the towel on Friday. And pretty soon you're in this hamster wheel of not seeing results. Okay, does that make sense? And so that really is stemming from a fear of sharing your goals because you're afraid of what other people will think or how other people will feel about it. Does that make sense? So that's just one example. So your assignment is to really think through what you're afraid of. Are you afraid of failure or succeeding? And what is that failure or what is that fear causing you to do? Okay. So now that you're aware of that, we're going to talk about what you can do about it. Okay, I have three things or a few things that you can really start implementing to help remove this self-sabotage. So the first one is removing your attachment to the result. Okay, so what I want you to do is instead of focusing on the outcome, focus on the process. And so it's easy to tie your emotions to the result, right? If you want to lose 30 pounds, it's easy to say, I will feel satisfied. I will feel good about myself, whatever, when I get here. Okay. And that's going to be a huge reason why you might self-sabotage if you're doing that. So if you instead tie those emotions to the habits and the process. Okay. So here's an example. Let's just stick with this 30-pound example, okay? So let's say you want to lose 30 pounds for a vacation. So instead of saying, I'm going to lose 30 pounds, I'm going to be so fit, I'm going to be so toned for this trip, you just watch me. That's like tying a lot of excitement and a lot of external reward and motivation to the outcome, okay? So instead, think, what are the actions that I need to do in order to reach this result? So maybe I need to, get in my workouts. I need to get in, 10,000 steps a day. I need to stick to my macros, whatever that looks like for you. Tie your attachment to that instead of the outcome. Okay. So then it's like, I hit my steps, I hit my workouts, I got my nutrition dialed in, and you feel success from that as opposed to the outcome. Okay. That's really going to help kind of nick that self-sabotage in the bud. Nip it. Did I say nick it? You're going to nip it in the bud because you're getting your satisfaction from following through with those daily habits as opposed to an outcome. Does that make sense, you guys? Another idea here is to really act like the person you want to become. Now, we talked about that imposter syndrome before, and this is something that you just kind of have to work through and almost kind of fake it until you make it. It becomes easier. One example would be like a smoker. Okay, someone who or if someone offered me a cigarette, I would be like, no thanks, I don't smoke. It wouldn't be tempting to me. It wouldn't be hard to say that. It would just be like, whatever. I don't smoke. I don't want a cigarette. As opposed to like asking someone who's trying to quit smoking, if they want a cigarette, they're going to be like, oh gosh, I mean, I do, but I don't know. This is so hard. I can't quite figure this out, So if you really decide what you want and who you are and act in that way, it can really help with self-sabotage. Okay. So another example is, for example, someone who has celiac disease, they don't eat gluten. They know if they choose to eat gluten, they're going to have all these negative health consequences, right? So I don't have celiac disease, so I can't speak for them, but I would imagine it's a bit easier for them to say no to gluten most of the time than it might be for someone who's just trying to cut back on carbs or whatever it is. So act like the person that you want to become and adopt that as your like to the core identity. Okay. I don't eat sugar is so much more empowering than saying like, well, I'm trying not to have very much sugar right now. Does that make sense? Now, again, I'm all about moderation. I'm not saying you can't have moderation. I'm just saying this self-talk and this identity you can create can really help a lot. Okay. So many of us, you guys, want change, but we don't want to change. So keep in mind that we really do benefit from self-sabotage. You might think, oh, it doesn't help me at all. Why do I do this? Just understanding how our minds do benefit from this is so helpful for stopping self-sabotage in its tracks. But know that it's not helpful to our long-term goals, right? So understanding this physiology can help us so much understand why we do it and how to stop it. So I hope that was helpful, you guys. So we went over, just to recap, 7 situations where self-sabotage is most likely, and a few ways to stop self-sabotage as well. So hopefully that helped you. If it helped you guys, can you do one thing for me? Can you really quick just pull out your phone and just screenshot this episode and share it and tag me in it? I would love to hear how this episode helped you, what resonated with you, maybe one takeaway you have from the episode. And, I'm a new podcast and I'm trying to reach more people. And I would love it, if you enjoyed this, to give me a 5-star rating and review if you love it and you're excited for more. Hope you enjoyed that. And I will see you guys next time.